Hello. Today is April 3rd, 2019. I'm meeting today with Mr. Fritz Barsch at his home in Erie, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer with the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Fritz, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Thank you.
Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Well, it's pretty simple. I was born on March 25th in 1928. Born to our family consisted eventually of 7 children, my father and mother, but it came on time. When I was born, I was the fourth child of that marriage. My dad was a school teacher at that time in a one-class school where 8 grades went to school, and which was also used as a church because it was in Poland, or should I say on the Polish border of Germany. But during the Hitler days, he wanted to Germanize some of the Polish outskirts, and that's why we ended up in that area.
So your family had moved to that area to Germanize
Yes.
it? Yeah. But you were born in Germany, or were you born there in that?
It was Germany when I was born.
Okay.
Today it is Polish. In fact, when I asked for a birth certificate, it came back in Polish, and I can't read it.
Really? Oh, interesting.
So my dad was a school teacher. This came back from World War I, where he was injured and got a shot in the head and lost an eye that went right through his nose and out one eye. So he was pretty well educated. He was hired by a lady about 8 miles from there to give the 2 girls piano lessons. So he drove every week, twice a week, to give the girls piano lessons with his newly bought motorcycle. And he ended up marrying the oldest girl, which is my mother, of course.
Okay.
It lasted about till I was 6 years old, when he was transferred to become a Hauptlehrer, they call it. That means a head teacher in a different town, here again close to the Polish border. There we lived for about 3 years until he became a superintendent of a school in a larger town called Leopschitz. And all of that is Upper Silesia. There at Leopschitz he became the superintendent, which is actually he was called a rector, which is actually in charge of a huge school district in that town. That brings me into 1940, when he was drafted into the army after he was injured in the First World War. So he became a paymaster for the German Wehrmacht and was stationed somewhere in Poland.
Was he able to get home on leave to see the family, or
He came home twice during the 2 years. He was also active in the Nazi Party, they call it, National Socialistic Party. Almost a must if you wanted to have a position like he had.
Sure, yeah.
So I became pretty active in something called the Hitler Youth. And somehow they liked me, and they promoted me and kept promoting me and kept promoting me till I was in charge of the whole county's Hitler Youth troops. And we had little marches, and we had a lot of bivouac and went outside in the woods and had almost military training. We learned how to shoot and how to find our way through woods, and how to read a compass, and so we were pretty well trained in the outdoors.
Right, yeah.
There in 1944 it got too hot because the Russians are advancing close to our area.
Had you experienced any fighting up to that point? Any bombings or anything up in your area up to?
Oh my Lord, yes.
What was that like? I can't imagine what that must be like.
Yeah, we had B-17s, a swarm of them coming over. In 1943, they only came once a week. And then later on in 1944, they came almost daily. The target was the manufacturing plant in our woods that produced a refinery of gasoline. And they absolutely wanted to kill it. So every time we had an alarm, we ran into the cellar as kids. Then the bombs fell and everything shook. As soon as the alarm was clear, we ran outside to help cleaning up the mess. The problem was that we were always fogged in. When the alarm sounded, all the fog barrels went off and the whole town was completely fogged in. And we could almost wear masks to get out there and help cleaning up the debris.
Oh, boy.
So it lasted months after months. It was horrible.
It must have been very terrifying. I just can't imagine what that is like.
It was just awful.
Oh.
Well, during that time, they promoted me to be another leader in the party at the youth organization. They sent me to Brandenburg in eastern Germany, and I never was so spoiled in my life. They asked Academy for Hitler Youth leaders, and they gave us our own apartment, our own bicycle. I had a modern shower, modern bedroom, a bathroom. It's unbelievable. We didn't know how to act with our own apartment.
Now, coming from, sorry to interrupt you, but coming from home, did you have those amenities at home, a shower and indoor plumbing? And
nobody understands how hungry we were in those years, how we scraped everything together. And as a family, we always had about 3 or 4 bedroom apartments, but we all had to share.
Yeah.
And this is the first time I had even my own dinner table, everything, my own kitchen. But it eventually got just as bad in Brandenburg, where they bombed everything. And my gosh, after about 2 months there, they bombed that school that I was in, and so I had to return back home. When I returned back home, the Russians kept coming closer and closer. So my mother took the other kids and got evacuated through a train. And that train was so full, they were so lucky to catch one of the last trains out. But they could barely, one had to crawl through the window, one of the kids. But I had to stay home because I was pretty active and also was drafted into an outfit called Volkssturm, which was not the Army, which was not the Air Force, but it was an organization that they put together to defend the home country, called Volkssturm. There we received a bazooka, or what you call an anti-tank weapon. We received a uniform, but not completely. I had my own pants on, but I got a new top, and I got a new hat. I knew how to shoot. I didn't get a rifle because I got a pistol, a 9mm pistol, because they used me as a messenger on a motorcycle. So I was in that organization almost like an army, messenger, delivery, and mail delivery, and also, most importantly, ammunition delivery to the front lines.
And at this time, you're what, 16, 17
I was 16 going to 17. But if you sit at home here and you hear the Russian bombs going off and the artillery coming in, they grabbed 16-year-olds because I was 6 foot tall, and they said, "You can fight for us." And we didn't mind at all. We loved to defend our country.
Sure.
So there I was a messenger. And I could only do that at night because I only had a little slit in my lamp on my motorbike. And it was all dirt roads in the front line. And I had to do it at night, and they gave me a few hours sleep, and during the daytime, the headquarters was in a big old red building in the woods, so I had to report there, pick up all my ammunition and all my mail and deliver it to the front lines. Every time I started the engine and put my helmet on, and that's why I can't drive a motorcycle today, because the bullets just kept flying. It just went chum, chum, chum.
Huh.
So I just ducked and drove as slowly as I could, but I didn't have a good muffler in those days. Mufflers didn't exist too much. So trying to deliver the mail to the different outposts was not easy. Sometimes I missed it, but most of the time I got it right. Sometimes they gave me the wrong ammunition for the wrong people, and they got pretty mad at me, and I don't blame them, I would be too, but I had to drive back and try to find the right stuff. And this is my army experience until I came to a railroad crossing where the barriers were down, and at night, and I waited for the train to come through, and there were a bunch of Russian soldiers putting a little rifle at my head and saying, "Now, you stop." And that's how I got into Russian prison ship, which was a fenced-in area in the middle of a dark, deep forest. And there were at least 200 to 300 or 250 German soldiers there, all kinds of people, that they kept in that temporary enclosure with hardly any food and hardly anything else that makes a human life possible. This is the hardest story to tell, but we slept. We slept outside underneath the trees. The Russian had it all fenced in, and the guards were walking back and forth day and night. We received a bowl of barley in the morning, and that was the only thing we got, and there was water, a little river running through that. That's a mountainous type river, and that was our water. And of course, the latrine, we called it, the restrooms, was just a big hole with a bunch of trees over it. One night, the Russians were absolutely animals. They were tiny little Mongolian type people that their rifles were bigger than they were. And they shot at any target they wanted to. There was no rhyme or reason. So when someone they didn't like it, boom, you're out and dead, and they took you and dropped you in the graves. So one night when I was sleeping on the bare ground with a little straw around next to a railroad guy, because he got shot, he didn't do the right thing that the Russians wanted him to do. So I slept next to him, and he was really hurting. He got shot in the stomach, and a few hours later he passed away. That was That was a godsend, because my grandpa was a railroader. My father was very interested in railroads, and so was I. I was with my grandpa all the time, driving in the locomotives, the trains, and I knew almost everything there was to know about trains. So I took his jacket and gave him mine. I put it on him, and I took his jacket, that railroad jacket. The cap didn't fit me, so I just left it alone, but I had the railroad jacket on. So the next morning, when the call came for the engineers to come and change to that was an end point for the railroads, where they came in, took the prisoners out into Russia, and brought back people that were injured, more or less Red Cross cars. So the next morning came the call for the engineers to come and operate the engines. That was an old 52 that I knew inside and out from my grandpa's days. So I became the heitzer, which is the fireman, and I was in charge of shoveling the coals into the burners and make sure the water is there and all this kind of stuff. I was real familiar with that. So the engineer that ran the engine and the other person, they were both Germans, and they talked to me and they knew that I knew everything, so they said, fine, you go ahead and be with us. And that was God's work. We took the train into Poland, and since they were all Germans, I could talk to them and they could talk to me. And the engineer said, hey, I think we're on the wrong track. And he said, oh heck, let's just see what happens. And wouldn't you believe it? There came another train straight at us. So the engineer said, jump, jump, jump. So we all jumped out, the three of us jumped out of the engine and ran into that thick forest. And then we heard that big bang, and we heard all kinds of commotion, but we just ran, and we scattered around so nobody could follow one person. So we just ran and ran till we couldn't hear anything anymore. And then came probably the worst 2 months of my life. I had to go back to the West because I knew the Russians are no fun. And I understood that the Americans were in the West, and somehow I thought I'm going to start walking through all those woods to the West. Well, it wasn't hard for me to figure out where East and West is, because we were taught to look at the moss on the trees. So I just kept walking with my boots from the army and just what I had on. It was raining, cold, nothing to eat. Yeah, the worst 2 months. And I followed the railroad track, at least kept the railroad track in my sight. I knew that it was dangerous to be close to it. I knew little stations. I laid down on the ground and watched them, what they were doing, and saw what they were doing and where I was. I could figure out just about where I was. I just kept walking, keeping the railroad tracks in my sight. Food and water. Water wasn't bad because there was a river running through that little hilly country there. But food, there was nothing to find. So I was here again. Here again, the good Lord was figuring out. And I found some blueberry bushes. Well, that time of the year, the blueberries didn't bloom. But they were left over from last year, and they were shriveled up and dried up. But it was food. Sorry.
That's fine. Oh, please, no.
But it was food. I chewed that stuff and somehow stayed alive. I had a couple lucky happenings to me during that time, and that was almost 2 months that I walked. 2 months. And one lucky thing was when I came to a forest station on the edge of the woods with a big tower where they erected for the forester to shoot wild pigs, this type of stuff. So I crawled up there into that big tower and found 2 blankets. That was a lifesaver. Now I could cover up at night, chewing the blueberries. And I used that blanket to cover up my head and sleep well. And then came the lucky part, finding an old German tank burned out on the forest edge, and slowly approaching it. Nobody was there, and I jumped inside, and my God, there was some real hard Kommissbrot bread and cans of Spam, and how lucky I was. So I made a type of rucksack, a backpack out of my blanket and packed it up.
Wow.
And from that time on, I knew I was going to live. It took another month almost until I finally ended up to following the railroad track to figure out, hey, there's a big town coming. There are a lot of tracks coming together, and could hear some noise from railroad engines. So one morning, there came a huge town, and I walked into the town called Praha, or Prague, in Czechoslovakia. And there were American soldiers. So I went, first thing I did was go into the bathroom, public bathroom, and clean up and look like a human being, and looked in the mirror, and I had a blue mouth full of blue teeth, because in those days blueberries were blue.
Yeah.
And the next stop I made is to a church. And I sat down in the library in church. Excuse me. And I wrote a letter to whom it may concern. Please let me get out of here. Please help me to get out of here. My grandpa was in the war, my dad was in the war, my oldest brother got killed in Russia, and I don't another war. Please let me get out of here. And I addressed it to whom it may concern and stuck it in the offering box in the church. Never forget. Never forget the wooden figurine nodding his head when I stuck that in. And then I tried to find the rest of the family. Thank God I had an aunt who told all of us, if anything ever happens and the war goes wrong, we all going to meet in a place in Austria called Mitterndorf, where she used to vacation. She was a Red Cross sister, and she vacationed there in that little town of Mitterndorf in Austria, where she befriended Mrs. Eingang. And she says, you report to Mrs. Eingang in Mitterndorf.
Sorry for interrupting, Fritz, but when you were in Prague, the Americans didn't pick you up as a German soldier?
No, there were so many people there running back and forth. Nobody cared who was who and who was where.
Okay.
It was just amazing, and it's the first time I saw freedom in my life. So, an old railroader, I knew how to hitchhike and how to take one train, the other. Mittendorf, I know I had good education, was in Salzkammergut, which is by Salzburg in Austria. So somehow I found my way through hopping on trains all the way down to Austria, to Mittendorf, asked in town if they knew Mrs. Eingang, and sure enough, I met Mrs. Eingang, and she says, well, they were waiting for you. I said, what's the matter? Yeah, he said, the whole Barsches, they're all there in the walled villa, in a little villa out in the forest, on the upper floor. So I got there, and I didn't hug my mother, I didn't hug my father, I didn't hug my kids, because I was full of lice. And the first thing they made me do is take all my clothes off, sit out on the balcony, and they washed all my clothes. And then they picked off all the lice that I had, if I couldn't find them myself, out of the hair and everywhere else. And then we tried to find some food, and that was hard. We haven't been starved for the last 3 years. Mother received rations, but food was almost impossible to get. So thank God there in Austria we could find some people that helped us out. So eventually, slower and slower, it was possible to find some food. I never forget Mom getting mad at the people that owned that cabin that we lived in downstairs. They threw out the potato peelings, and she said, please, please save them for me. I can make a soup out of it, but they wouldn't do that. So I found a job in Austria on a farm. That was one of the highlights of my life, living in the Alps, way up there, taking care of cows, bringing down the milk to the railroad station. That was so much fun, and recuperated pretty good. But I was so skinny and so worn out that when they made us leave Austria to go back to Germany, because the Austrians didn't like the fugitives there, they had to put me into a hospital in Ebensee, which used to be a concentration camp that the Americans made a hospital out of. And it took about a week to get me healed up again. And then I followed with a train back to northern Germany, where the rest of the family got situated, and eventually we found jobs. We worked in the woods, peeling trees, and any kind of job we could find. But I decided I got to do something, and so I went from door to door, banging on doors and walking around in the countryside, asking for a job. I knew room and board is the only thing I could find, but somebody had to take me. The farmers all said, no, we have too many fugitives here, we don't have anything. But in about 3 weeks, I came to a little town called Bad Sachsa in the Harz Mountains. And there was a master baker. He said, well, I could use a guy that is strong and healthy and can lift the flour sacks, and you could be my apprentice, but you have to stay with me for 3 years, and I'll teach you the profession. So that's when I became a baker. That's the last thing in my life I thought about, but when there's free food, and when there's a place to stay and to sleep, you thank God for what you have. And that's how I got involved. 3 years later, I passed all the examinations and all the schooling, and I became a journeyman. And then I have to, by law, go into 5 different places to do your journeymanship in order to become a master chef, a baker. So I went to Württemberg, I went to the Schwaben, to the Saarland. I worked into different bakeries where I could learn different trades. One time I even worked for half a year in a confectionery just to learn the torte making and torte and marzipan work and chocolate work. The biggest job I had was in Menzingen by Reutlingen, a bread factory out of Stuttgart, and they made me a dough mixer. And that is awful tough because you had to mix at least 20 different types of doughs for pretzels, for bread, for buns. And there was a conveyor belt, and there were 12 guys on each side making up the doughs that you mixed. And if it wasn't just perfect, they threw it back at you. That was a good education.
Now, were you in the Western sector, or were you in the Russian sector? What?
No, that was all in the American sector.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yeah, the southern Germany.
Okay. And your family was there as well?
No, they were up in northern Germany. Yeah. But when you have a profession, you follow the directions.
Yeah, right.
And one day, my brother was with me. He didn't live with me, but he was about 10 miles away on a farm. He worked on a farm, my little brother. And I was close to my master examination. I took my schooling and everything else, had it completed, and I did my journeymanship in 5 different things, so now I was ready to make my master the examination. And I be darned, there comes a letter out of the blue that there's a family in Bremerhaven that couldn't make it to the ship. Will you and your brother come right away within 24 hours and report to the Bremerhaven ship station for immigration?
Wow. You had prior to that, you had applied for immigration?
Well, in Prague, when I wrote that letter in the church, somehow that got somewhere.
Really?
Yeah, couldn't believe it. So they followed me somehow because they knew where I lived, I guess. So I called my little brother. We had telephones then. Said, hey, pack up your stuff. No, I'm not. I just bought my bicycle. I said, yeah, I know. But I'm not going by myself. I can't go into a strange country. I'm too scared. You come with me or else. And be at this railroad station in about 8 hours, and then I'll join you, and then we'll go up to Bremerhaven. I thought he wouldn't ever come, but he did. So there we boarded the ship. We really didn't know where it was going until they told us on the ship about 3 days later that we're going to the New York harbor. Ellis Island. Ellis Island. Sure enough, after about 7 days or 8 days on the ship, and then the warranty, and they stop you for about a day to go through the ship and check you out for diseases and stuff. We got into Ellis Island, and they posted our names and everything else, gave us a little money, and told us where to go to work on a farm in Colorado. Thank God I knew my geography and I knew where Colorado was. So...
Well, your geography was good. How was your English?
Yeah.
Did you speak any English?
Yeah, they taught me. They taught me very well in German schools. I had to take Latin. It was mandatory when I was 10 years old. I had to take Latin, and I did take English, those two. My brother wasn't that good in English, but I'd helped that I knew it. So we ended up in a place called La Salle, Colorado. And there was a farmer by the name of Mr. Stromberger who said, I'm supposed to pick you up to tell you to come to a farmer by the name of Mr. Lind in Severance. So we felt like kings. We were driven by a car, a big car. Never seen such a big car in my life before. So I reported to Mr. Lind
And what year was this? Did you come over?
in 1952 in
50.
April.
Okay.
So I reported to Mr. Willie Lind where I was supposed to work, and my brother was supposed to work for Mr. Paul Lind. There were 4 brothers there that had the Lind farms in Severance. Well, we did a good job. We tried to work as hard as we could, send letters back to Germany, show them how big the corn grows around here, and how we plowed the ground, and I had to plow straight rows, and every time I go straight rows up to the farmer's house, there was somebody waving in the window. When I turned around, straight rows and turned around, and there was somebody waving at the window again. A year later, I married her. And then I worked in a bakery in Greeley. After I had worked off my year on the farm, I could leave and worked in a grocery store called Brennan's Food Market in Greeley, and then later on in a bakery called Bakerite Bakery, until I received a letter from the United States Service, Selective Service, greetings. We are invited to be in Denver at such and such a time for the purpose of joining the Army. Well, okay. Both of us. So we both went to Denver, and there we were getting into the Army, mustering out in Fort Ord, California. Basic training. I think 6 weeks or something like that, basic training, Fort Ord, California. I even had my wife with me in the last few weeks. They gave me a certificate of achievement because I was the best soldier in the cooking class. So I couldn't get out of that. I couldn't become a soldier. I had to stay in the kitchen and be a cook or a chef, where my brother got the lucky draw, and he has to get to Germany as an interpreter in Berlin.
Oh, wow.
Well, I mean, I have to tell you one story, though.
Oh, please, yes.
In Fort Ord, our basic training, we were given, and I forgot all about that until I met in Estes Park at a garage sale. I met a person, and he looked at me and said, "Are you Fritz?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, I know you." "From where?" "From Fort Ord, California."
Really?
"How can we forget you? You 2 of you." What happened is we had to go into a bivouac that is out in the woods, and they gave us a certain time, I think it was 2 hours, to run in the woods, to post a tent, and have your backpack opened up in front of the tent with all the clothes folded neatly. Well, both of us had a tent. We had it neatly folded. We had it all done up, and we had still plenty of time, so we started landscaping around the tent. Collected rocks and tiny rocks, and made a nice little walkway into it. And when the inspection came, we both sat in front of the tent with our rifles and our backpack open, and they looked at us and they called, "Photographer, photographer." So they took a picture of us. So we got an achievement award for having the best tent pitched up in that skin. Okay, then I ended up in Fort Lewis, Washington. To make it worse, the headquarters division of the engineering company, 6th Army area, because they were used Fort Lewis, Washington for the Korean War for backup. So they trained the soldiers for the Korean War in Fort Lewis, Washington. Well, they wouldn't take me as a soldier, even though they gave me a sharpshooter's medal. But they kept me in the kitchen. And they kept me in the kitchen even when we went out in the field. And when we went out to the field, the colonels and the generals that were the headquarters division wanted to eat. And they gave me a little stove that was fired with gasoline, General Army stove with a big pan there. And to make a long story short, I got another award of achievement there because I made pastries and all kinds of beautiful petit fours for the service people that I fed. And the generals and the colonels, they couldn't believe it, that I could do that in the gasoline-fired stove. So it really ended up with a parade after the maneuver was over, where I was lined up with about 8 or 9 other soldiers, and they made a parade for us, and the general and the colonels congratulated us for what we did.
Wow.
Okay, that's the end of the story of the Army time.
How long were you in the Army then? Just
Yeah, I had to do 2 years.
years, uh-huh.
Right. But thank God I did 2 years because I got a, what do you call that? I got the benefits
Oh, good.
out of that.
The GI.
So I had to be the GI benefits. Well, my gosh, I am a chef and I'm a baker. Let's go to the University of Denver. They have a hotel and restaurant school. And my gosh, can't be any better. That's one of the top schools. Applied and, oh no, Fritz, you're about 6th grade education. We can't admit you. Oh, that broke my heart. So I went to Emily Griffith's Opportunity School in downtown Denver. What can I do to get into that hotel and restaurant management school? Well, in about 3 weeks or so, I applied again, and sure enough, I got accepted.
Really? Yeah.
At DU. That was a hard time because I had a family now. This one was born, and my son came also, and my gosh, I had to go 4 years and drive for 2 years in downtown Denver at the business school, and 2 years at the hotel and restaurant school up at the campus. And I had a full-time job in a downtown on Broadway, a little tiny, I call it a greasy spoon, but it was a nice restaurant. Mr. Morris owned it on 2nd and Broadway, until I finally got accepted at the airport at an outfit called Sky Chefs Incorporated. And there I became a baker at Sky Chefs at the Stapleton Airport. Just for a funny sidekick, I parked my car on a meter for 8 hours, a nickel meter for 8 hours in front of the Stapleton Airport while I worked. Times should change.
Yeah, right.
But I know the University Boulevard inside and out because I lived in the house that we finally made a down payment on Niagara Street, and I had to drive from Niagara Street all the way up to the campus, back and forth. But it was a real hard time that I had to go through because to take care of the family, to go full-time to school and to go full-time to work, because I always carried at least 14 or 15 hours at the school, and full-time work was always 8 hours or more.
When did you sleep? Or did you?
That was what I robbed And I smoked a lot of cigarettes, and I drank a lot of coffee to study in the night, in the middle of the night. But unfortunately, in this business, you have to get up early because the restaurant opens up at 5:30 in the morning. And Stapleton never closes, so you have to be there all the time. There I was a baker, and it didn't last long. They made me a kitchen supervisor of the service kitchen. And it didn't take long, and they made me a superintendent of food. And it didn't take long, they made me an assistant manager. And then I get a letter from the president of the company in New York that I was selected to be the manager in El Paso, Texas, of the international airport for Sky Chefs. So there we moved to Texas. I never earned so much money in my life as a manager of Texas International Airport. And I never had so many people employed in my life, all of them coming over the border every morning in a bus. And I better learn my Spanish pretty fast if I wanted to survive. And there were 2 up to 3 buses at times, bringing them in and taking them back at shift change. And that was the flight kitchens and the dining room people and the coffee shop people, the snack bar people, the bar people. We had 4 bars in that terminal, and I was also in charge of the gift shop, the books, and all the other gifts. So at one time I had 800 employees there. Especially the flight kitchen had the most. They were now starting the jet services with the galleys, and it was a tough job, but oh, did I make good money. Until my wife said I had to ask her if they want me to take over to go to Cleveland to be regional manager. And Ruthie, my wife, said, I don't know. She called me Dad. I think that's enough of that. It was a job where I was never home.
Yeah.
I know I had free flights. I had to fly constantly to train stewardesses and to go to seminars and all kind of stuff. So I said, okay, let's go back home. We had enough money to hire an architect to draw up a new nice restaurant that we were going to build in Fort Collins. My brother-in-laws and my mother-in-law all pitched in a little money, and we formed a corporation called Cup of Lantern to build a restaurant in Fort Collins. Then my one brother-in-law, who was a pretty wealthy farmer, said, hey, Fritz, I don't know about that. I think we want to watch first and see if you can handle it. There's a little coffee shop in Lucerne that is for rent. Can you come up here and rent that place and see if you can run a restaurant like that, a little tiny coffee shop on a truck stop? And I sent my wife up there to look at it because I didn't have time. And he got so upset that I sent Ruth up there. Why can't you come? Well, I finally gave in and said, okay, I'll prove to you that I can run a little coffee shop. Well, we rented the coffee shop. 9 months later, we bought it for $32,000. And 10 years later, we sold it. But we had remodeled it since then. We had made a big place out of it. We had a big bar, our first liquor license in the county. We had added to it, so it became a 600-seat restaurant. White tablecloths. Never forget the day when I asked one of the farmers with a Stetson hat on, sitting in the dining room, to please take his hat off. I thought I'd get killed. I learned fast. And then it just mushroomed on me. One restaurant after another, institutional feeders, you name it. State Farm wanted me to do all their food service for their employees, so I did that. I built another restaurant called the Post-WWII. I took a Marshall's cafeteria that was broken to run it. There was a church that had blown up in downtown Greeley, so I bought that church building and made a cafeteria out of it. Let's see. There was a place up in Eaton that was a locker, storage and locker plant where farmers brought their meat in. They had a huge freezer, and I could use a big freezer, so I bought that building. And sure enough, Eastman Kodak Company came into town and they said, Fritz, we'd like for you to do the food service for us. So I said, okay, I'll do it for 10 years, but that's it. So here I was feeding 3,000 people in Kodak through vending machines mostly, because they had clean rooms where nobody could enter, and I had to have vending machines where the people could buy their food, and we manufactured that in the main kitchen. Then I formed my own corporation called ARC, Automatic Refreshment Centers Incorporated, to take on all the other, took Ames College's food service, took Greeley National Bank's food service, many, many locations, the Fish Hook Company, and the 5 or 6 little machines here and there. It just kept blooming. It just kept growing and growing, and I had 128 employees at that time, managers and supervisors, and wouldn't you know it, pretty soon they said you have to have a heart operation. So I had to have open heart operation. That did it. That's it. Okay, I'm quitting. And instead of growing anymore, I started cutting down, starting to lease out, sell out anything I could, and eventually got rid of everything, just my house.
Except the little cafe in Greeley that Linda helped you with.
Pardon?
The cafe in Greeley that Linda helped
Yeah, I still had a little cafe in Greeley and called Fritz's Promenade Cafe. Yeah. There's a gal that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And I had my whole family helping a lot. I had the relation helping a lot. Every Mother's Day and every Thanksgiving, everyone of the farmers' wives and more had to come and help me. But finally, before our youngest daughter was born, or while our youngest daughter was born, my wife had a hard time carrying her, and I felt so sorry for her, and I'd visit her, of course, every day that she had to go to the hospital. And I found a piece of land that really looked nice on a lake, so I tried to buy that, and one day when I brought her back home, I said, hey, I'll drive you by a piece of land I want to buy and build a house on. And that's where we built a house on a year later, called Sealy Lake Subdivision. We were the first ones to start it. And there we lived for 49 years, until Carol, very, I mean, my 3 children, I can't tell you how much I love them, but how hard they work in their life and how successful they are. And Carol, of course, the oldest daughter, said, hey, Mom and you, we have to take care of you guys. We can't come down every Sunday and check on you. You come up here and move up here. So we moved up here. Carol found us a house, bought that, and then 3 years later my wife passed away, just before our 65th anniversary. And here I sit in the house of my youngest daughter. End of the story.
Wow. Well,
And Linda is very wonderfully blessed by having you here.
Those kids are just amazing.
Well, I want to go back up a little bit and ask you some questions. You kept talking about this girl waving in the window
Yeah.
when you were farming. Talk about how you wooed Ruth and how that all came about.
Well, then she kept waving and waving, and then finally she came to see us in our in our little house. It was a labor house. We had just one little stove and one couch and two beds for us two kids. And they felt sorry for us, so they brought some food to go once in a while. So, of course, we invited them to sit down. We talked quite a bit, and make the long story short, we went to church with them every Sunday. The grandpa came and picked us up, and we went to church, and Grandma liked that too. And so it just started developing until Ruth, my wife, said, I have to teach you more English. She used the wrong words at times, so she took me out to a movie here and there. So she taught me how to speak proper English when I asked her a question. So that's how it all started.
Yeah, yeah. And what about your family that remained in Germany? How did they make it through the years, and how did their lives turn out?
Yeah, well, the youngest sister of mine, she was, let's back, sorry, I have to.
Oh, please do, yes.
Yeah. Once I was over here, of course, we're a tight family, so we said, let's bring them over here and see if they will like it here. So we helped sponsoring my two sisters, the older ones, and we brought them over here 2 years after I came, and they were by profession gardeners, they worked in garden shops and greenhouses. And they lived in Denver in an apartment, later on bought a house there, and very successful in their profession. One worked for United Airlines and the other one for the government in the office. Both of them, one is now passed and the other one is living in an old pension home in Denver. We brought over the other sister, the youngest sister, and she came over for about 2 years. But she was so much in love with a young man in Germany that she went back to marry him, and he has a, what do you call it, a florist shop?
Garden center.
Yeah, garden and florist shop. They even sent all the flowers to Carol's wedding from Germany, the whole thing.
Wow.
The boutonnieres and everything. And they came over here to be with them, with the flowers.
Wow.
And then there was the youngest son, the youngest brother, and he didn't amount to much. My dad was always pretty much ashamed of him because he flunked out of grade school. And the kid didn't have any interest in anything, so at 13, my dad finally put him to work on a farm, and he was a farmhand. And of course, over here he was a farmer, and he did real well. But not very long. He decided to work for United Airlines in the baggage handling, and he saw the suitcases going through, and he imitated people a lot, and he became real good in languages. He went to CU. Believe it or not, he made his PhD.
Wow.
And is now a retired professor at Orlando, Central Florida University. Yeah, so they all did fine. We got them over here, and they appreciated that. My dad built a house together with my younger sister, and nice little home in the mountains, and we took our kids on vacation several times to live there, and they just enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, let me ask you about your profession. I mean, you got into bakery and the restaurant business more out of really survival.
Definitely.
Really. Yeah. Had you had the opportunity Was there anything? Were you thinking you wanted to do something else? Was there anything else?
Yeah, I was determined to become a dentist. In Germany,
Really?
they call it a tooth doctor
Uh-huh.
because a dentist is somebody that doesn't go to the university, but a dentist is one that operates. And that's why I took so much Latin and tried to do all the... knew a lot about chemistry in those days, but not anymore. But that all went by the wayside.
Wow, wow.
But chemistry helped in bakery too. In fact, so bad that I couldn't keep up when I was in charge of Kodak, and I had two dietitians under me, and I hated to give orders to what to do with diets. I went to CSU and took some courses in chemistry so I could tell them I know something about it too.
Wow. Wow. Well, Carol, is there anything, I know we're simply getting the tip of the iceberg of this story. Any stories that he's left out that you'd like him to talk about that you can think of that he's left out? Or do you think we've covered his story?
I do know that my grandmother has written her memoirs, and in the memoirs there are a lot of stories about what they did after the war when they were in Austria and how very, very difficult that was, those times. And how they were looking for jobs and food and anything to keep the family fed was very difficult.
Yeah. It was horrible. You hate to talk about that time. But then I developed a little interest with my wife because she could talk German too. She had a dialect that was pretty much a strong dialect, but we could understand each other. So those were the Russians.
The Russians,
the Germans from Russia that immigrated to the Windsor area. So I said, man, I better dig into that. So I did Ancestry.
Yeah.
And before the Church of Latter-day Saints did anything, I had my ancestry from Russia with the help of my brother who knows a lot of languages, and he translated all the Russian stuff for me. And then, of course, my father had to have ancestry because over in Germany they all had to have ancestry to prove that they were Jewish.
Ah, right.
So is very. So we have ancestry on both sides going back to 17 and 1600, all the way through.
Wow.
So I have two big boxes down there with all kinds of, not only pictures but also the birth certificates and all that stuff.
Wow. Wow.
That was interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
As an adjunct, I remember the Fort Ord story that Mom would tell when they were in basic training, that they kind of missed each other, and a number of the married couples there would go in and sneak their husbands out on the weekends in the trunk.
Yeah.
And
That was mean. Yeah, but I had her in the trunk.
yeah, you were in the trunk, I think.
Yeah, I was in the trunk, and because I wouldn't put her in the trunk. So she went through the gate, and she showed her pass, and we rented a little house in Seaside, California.
Wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And as an adjunct to the story that he told about setting up the tents, the gentleman in Estes Park where he was that remembered him said that the rest of the troop was so dumbfounded that these two German boys could set up the tent so quickly, and they couldn't even, the rest of the troop couldn't even read the instructions, and they already had their tent landscaped. So he remembered that, and I think that was from those young Hitler Boy Scout kind of
training. Oh yeah, that was really good. Yeah, I even have a picture of that, but I can't find it right now.
Oh,
A
wow.
picture of us sitting in front of the tent for inspection. But the whole battalion then knew us because they couldn't believe it.
Wow. Wow. How do you, this is probably a silly question, but how do you think all the struggles you went through motivated you to do what you obviously were very, very successful at what you did. I'm sure that had to play very much in your mind.
Hunger will do anything.
Yeah.
When you're hungry, you try everything to stay alive, and this is probably what drove me. I mean, gee whiz, I was looking at anything that was edible. Mom was my mom was very sharp too. She tried to do anything, and I never forget my 7th birthday, when she made me a cake out of beans. She ground up beans and made me a birthday cake out of beans.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know what an orange was until I was about 15. Bananas we didn't know either.
And how about that time period when you were escaped the Russians and were working your way back to the American lines? I mean, you weren't eating properly, you weren't sleeping properly, you were out in the wilderness,
Out in the open, soaking wet. all
soaking
the
wet.
time.
Hygiene was awful. I mean, any one of those things could knock a person down.
Impossible, yeah.
How do you think how'd you make
It
it?
was awful. I never forget when I walked into that town of Praha, I had blood in my shoes. It's squishing, you know. That's how raw the feet were. Skinnier than heck, but somehow we found something to eat, blueberries, and well, Dad he was good in biology, a teacher is, and he told us all the plants that were edible. So we ate dandelions a lot, sucked out the milk out of dandelion straws, and anything to stay alive.
Oh, geez, I can't imagine.
That's why I get a little mad sometimes at my little daughter when she throws some food in the garbage.
I know at your 90th birthday you talked about walking and walking and walking. It must have been a long way from getting out of escaping to when you got to Prague and then
It
to
was
Austria.
2 months. I see. The problem is once you're in a Russian prison ship, you lose time. You don't even know what months it is anymore. So when I escaped, I had no idea the date or anything. It just go by the weather.
What was the season? What season? Do you know roughly what season?
It was April.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
April, March,
Okay.
February. Yeah, I think they caught me in February, either end of January or February. So it was pretty darn cold then.
Oh.
And that was about the hardest part of my whole life, is those 2.5 months walking and walking and walking. But I had some other hard times too. Going to the university and taking care of a family and working full times and being called in because of a snowstorm. The people are stranded in the terminal, which happened on November the 16th when my son was born.
Oh.
And I had to go to the airport, and I couldn't leave because it was all snowed in. But somehow I called my brother-in-law, and he picked me up. Somehow he came by, and I was there when he was born.
Oh, wow.
Down here in the Lutheran Hospital.
Denver.
Denver, yeah.
Wow.
So those are moments you never forget.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
So that was a real hard time too. This one here sat on my lap. Well, I was studying for the entrance exam, and she was born in Fort Collins. right there with my wife. And then a year later or so, she sat on my lap and took all my cigarettes out of my pocket when I studied and broke them up.
Oh, wow.
But somehow I had to take care of my kids, and somehow I had to study, so that we did two things in one.
Wow. Well, is there as we close down this interview, is there anything that you would like to talk about that has come to the surface? Anything I didn't ask very many questions. I pretty much listened to a fascinating story, but anything else so that we can ideally round out your story, or do you think we primarily got...
I hope I covered way too much.
No.
But I can show you a few pictures
Yeah,
just to make sure it's true.
We'll close it out here. Is there any closing statement you'd like to make to this tape to friends and family that will watch this?
Well, I'm so proud that we were almost married 65 years. It was really hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes there were fights, but you have to learn how to forget and forgive. And you have to learn how to love the Lord. Mm-hmm. Because it was somebody up there that helped me through all that. It just wasn't by accident.
Yeah, right.
So that's probably the best way to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, Fritz, I want to thank you very much for sitting down to tell an incredible story today. Thank you. Well, Fritz, after we shut off the camera and got talking a little bit more afterwards, there was a couple stories that kind of floated to the top that Carol asked me to ask you again, so we've got the camera back on again. And it all centers around the time back home and during the bombing raids, particularly the bombing of your school and the potato bugs, if you would tell those two stories.
Mm-hmm. The bombing became more frequently and more frequent. And we hardly had a day in between to clean up all the craters and all the tiles and all the wood and all the bricks laying around in the streets. Who else could they ask but the Hitler Youth kids to help cleaning up, because the men were all in the war as soldiers and we only had women in the town. So as a leader of the Hitler Youth organization, I had to tell each one where to go and clean up. I myself was involved mostly with my friend to clean up the craters, and at one time I remember we have to dig into a basement to knock all the bricks out of the way to rescue at least 4 people that were stuck down there, one of which was almost so destroyed that we didn't give her any hope to live any longer. Do you remember this all happened in the fog, because the town was fogged in and we had to feel our way through almost. Well, one time we got the alarm and there came the clouds of B-17s. Of course, we had guns, 8mm anti-aircraft guns, and they started firing and firing and firing. We finally when the alarm was over, then we finally had some time to see what is happening and what to clean up. One time the alarm was over, all the all clear sounds, and we couldn't find any damage. We couldn't believe it. We thought that maybe they missed us, or maybe they didn't want to bomb us this time. And after a while we realized what happened. There were a bunch of bugs crawling all over the place. And those things were potato bugs. They had stripes on their back. And someone told us they are potato bugs, we better get out in the potato fields and collect them. So they handed out a whole bunch of brown bags to us, and we went through the potato fields collecting all the bugs. Wow. And then destroying them. The ones in town we didn't bother, but the ones in the field we certainly did.
Wow.
That was a real funny thing that we never forget.
Yeah.
But then the worst that happened, there was a bomb alarm, and there were the B-17s again, and the bombs started flying, and I knew they were really close to us. At that time, my friend and I, we were still cleaning up from yesterday's debris, and we were outside, we were not in the cellars. So we took our chance to get shrapnel, but we just had to do that. and there was a bomb real close to us going off, and after it was all over, we realized that it hit our high school. And that was the General Litzman High School, as they called it that time, and we had school on in the basement. The students were all down in the basement, but it was not deep enough, and the bombs went through it, and unfortunately everyone in that school got killed, teachers and students. So we are the only two left from that era, and if you don't believe me, ask my friend Klaus Gemming, who emigrated to the United States and ended up in Hartford, Connecticut. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago, and I gave my condolences to his wife. But we were the only two left out of the high school.
Oh, wow.
And that was such a tragedy. So there's no high school reunion for me.
Wow.
Amen.
Thank you, Fritz.
Mm-hmm.